Little boy. Abused after father's funeral. Dog's instinct led police to the heartbreaking truth. The snow had turned the Portland suburbs into a silent, suffocating world of white. Frost hung heavy on every mailbox and porch rail, and the wind cut like glass down the quiet streets. Most homes stayed sealed shut, warm light flickering behind thick curtains. But at the end of a cul-de-sac, under a flickering porch light, stood a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 5. Wet socks clung to his feet, bluish from cold. A damp sweater sagged off his thin shoulders, and in his arms he clutched a torn teddy bear. His dark hair stuck to his forehead, and his lips trembled from more than just the cold. In front of him stood a dog, a German shepherd, large and silent, his coat dusted with snow, tail still, breath puffing in slow clouds. He didn't bark, didn't move, just stood between the child and the world like a living wall. Officer Kyle Monroe stopped as soon as he turned the corner. His boots crunched into the fresh snow, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. His partner behind him muttered something under his breath, but Kyle held up a hand. "Wait." The dog's head turned sharply at the sound of his voice. Amber eyes locked on him, not with aggression, but a steady, grounded focus that felt too knowing. Kyle narrowed his eyes. He knew that look. It wasn't just some stray guarding food or territory. This dog had purpose. He took a slow step forward, hand lowered, voice calm. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. We're not here to hurt him." The German shepherd growled low, chest rumbling, but didn't advance. Instead, he glanced back at the boy, then back at Kyle. A decision. A line in the snow. Kyle's radio buzzed, but he ignored it. The boy didn't cry, didn't speak. He just stood there, shivering violently, clutching the bear to his chest like it was the only thing keeping him from vanishing into the snow. Kyle's instincts flared. Something was wrong, not just with the boy, with the whole picture. "Step back," he told his partner. "We're not just looking at abuse here." The partner hesitated, then retreated a few paces. Kyle crouched slowly, keeping his movements measured, respectful. He'd worked with canine units before. He knew how to read tension in a dog's spine, the way the ears twitched, the chest tightened. This wasn't a dog reacting from fear. This was a dog holding position. "Where's your family?" Kyle asked the boy softly. The boy looked at him, eyes wide and glassy. "She said I'm not family." Kyle felt something snap in his chest. The dog let out a single, low huff. Not a warning, a signal. Kyle reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out an emergency blanket. He held it out to the boy but didn't move closer. The shepherd stepped aside, just enough to let the boy move. That was all the permission Kyle needed. He crossed the last few feet quickly, draped the blanket around the child's shoulders. The boy flinched, then leaned into the warmth. Kyle could feel how cold he was through the layers. "What's your name, kid?" "Eli." "You okay, Eli?" He shook his head. Kyle gently guided him toward the patrol car. The German shepherd followed, never straying more than a foot from Eli's side. As they neared the vehicle, Kyle flicked his eyes toward the house. The porch light was still on. Snow on the steps was scuffed, footprints barely fading. Someone had dumped water. The boards were still wet. He opened the door, helped Eli into the back seat, wrapped another blanket around him. The dog jumped in after him without hesitation, curled up on the floor, his body pressed to Eli's legs. The boy looked at Kyle. "Can he stay?" Kyle nodded. "Yeah, he stays." The dog didn't bark, didn't pant, just watched Kyle from the shadows like he was measuring him too. As Kyle started the engine, he noticed something odd. The teddy bear. It was waterlogged, old, fraying at the seams. But when Kyle reached to move it gently, it made a soft thump, heavier than it should have. He frowned, picked it up. "Eli," he said, Mind if I take a look at this? The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly. Kyle turned the bear over, fingers tracing the stitching. He felt it again, solid, not stuffing. Using his pocket knife, he carefully opened a seam along the bear's back. Inside, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was a small key. On the tag, Briarbank, Box 118. Kyle stared at it for a long moment. "What is this, kid?" Eli looked down. "It was in there when my dad gave me the bear. He said, if anything ever happened to him, not to lose it." Kyle's knuckles tightened around the key. The father was dead. The stepmother locked a 5-year-old in the snow after his funeral. And now there was a key to a bank box hidden inside a child's toy. This wasn't just a case of abuse. This was a setup, and the dog had known it before anyone else. He looked in the rearview mirror. The German Shepherd was watching him. Not the road. Him. Kyle whispered, "What did you just save this kid from?" The snow continued to fall, quiet and slow. And somewhere behind them, in that house, was a crime that hadn't been uncovered yet. But the dog already knew. The warm blast of air inside the precinct lobby hit like a wave as Kyle pushed the glass door open. Eli flinched at the sudden change in temperature, but didn't let go of the dog, who moved in perfect sync with him, every muscle taut yet controlled. Snow clung to their clothes and fur, melting in thin streaks down their backs. Kyle nodded to the desk sergeant, a woman named Trina with a clipped voice and sharp eyes. She gave one look at the boy and the dog and didn't ask questions. That was why Kyle respected her. She'd been in long enough to recognize when something spoke louder than paperwork. "Room 3, she said simply, reaching for a towel. "I'll call. Social services." "Hold off a bit," Kyle replied. "Let me talk to him first." The room was small, 1 table, 2 chairs, and a faded mural of a lighthouse peeling at the edges. Kyle helped Eli into a chair and offered him a mug of warm water. The boy cupped it with both hands like it was gold. The German Shepherd, no collar, no tags, settled at Eli's feet without a sound. His body curved protectively toward the boy, his head resting near the child's ankle. His ears flicked at every noise in the hallway, but his gaze rarely left the door. Watching, waiting. Kyle crouched across from Eli, keeping his tone level and his posture open. "Can I ask you a few things, Eli? You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but it might help me understand." The boy didn't look up. He nodded slightly. Kyle glanced at the teddy bear still clutched in one arm, then down at the key he'd taken from its seam. The initials on the tag still echoed in his brain. Briarbank. That wasn't some neighborhood savings place. That was private, discreet, the kind of place people used when they didn't trust others. Kyle spoke gently. "Who gave you the bear?" "My dad," Eli whispered. "When he got sick." Kyle paused. "He's not around anymore, is he?" Eli shook his head, eyes still fixed on the mug. "He died last week. They said it was his heart." A beat passed. Then Eli added, even quieter, "But he was yelling before. He said—" She did something. Kyle's spine straightened. "She? Who's she?" "My stepmom, Claire." "Claire what?" "Claire Jameson now. It used to be Claire Reed." Kyle nodded slowly. He knew that name. A local real estate broker. Polished, photogenic. Her face had been on bus benches and billboard ads for years. Married Richard Jameson, the tech consultant who'd just died in his sleep. Kyle kept his voice steady. "Do you live with Claire now?" Eli's lips pressed together. "She told me not to call her mom. She said, 'Inside the house is for family.' Then she dumped water on me and locked the door." He said it like he was describing a weather report. Cold facts, no tone. But that flatness made Kyle's hands curl into fists at his sides. The dog stirred slightly at Eli's shift in tone, his eyes lifting to Kyle as if to ask, "Do you see it now?" Kyle did. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was control, isolation. A boy abandoned in the snow, soaking wet, after burying his father. There were rules for abuse, laws for neglect. But what Kyle saw was something colder, calculated. He leaned in. "Do you know the dog's name?" Eli shook his head. "He just came." Kyle looked at the shepherd. "You just showed up?" The dog blinked once, slow, unbothered, then looked back to Eli. Kyle felt a chill that had nothing to do with snow. Some dogs were just smart, others, they chose. There was a knock at the door. Kyle stood and opened it a crack. Officer Trina held out a file. "Claire Jameson reported the kid missing an hour ago, claimed he wandered off after the funeral, says she was frantic." Kyle's jaw tightened. Frantic enough to pour ice water on a child and shut the door behind him. Trina's eyes narrowed. "She asked if she could come by and pick him up." "She can wait." He shut the door and turned back to Eli, who was now stroking the dog's ears slowly. His fingers curled in soft circles. The dog didn't move, just let him. Silent comfort. Kyle returned to his seat. "You said your dad gave you that bear. Did he ever say why it was important?" Eli hesitated, then nodded. "He told me, if anything happened to him, to never lose it." Kyle reached into his pocket and held up the key again. "Do you know what this is for?" "No," Eli murmured. "But Daddy said it would help tell the truth. That some people lie with their mouth, but not their paper." Kyle sat back. He knew then. This wasn't just a key, it was a breadcrumb, left behind by a man who knew he might not wake up. And maybe, just maybe, the only reason any of this had surfaced was because a dog decided to stay. He glanced at the shepherd again. His ears perked slightly, sensing the shift in Kyle's breathing. "You knew, didn't you?" Kyle whispered. The dog didn't move, but his eyes never blinked. That night, Kyle filed the report, but left out the key. Not yet. Not until he understood the depth of it. He checked on Eli again before heading out, finding the boy curled on a cot in the break room, the German shepherd wrapped against him like a shield. Outside, snow continued falling over the city, and somewhere in the darkness, someone thought the truth had been buried with Richard Jameson. They were wrong. The dog never left, and neither would Kyle. The precinct's holding room wasn't much, but it was warmer than the street and quieter than the front desk. A cot had been brought in for Eli, and a heavy blanket now covered his shoulders. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting a soft yellow glow over the small space. The boy hadn't said much since the interview. He sat curled in the corner of the cot, the tattered teddy bear clutched tightly in both arms, his knees pulled to his chest. The German shepherd lay nearby, chin resting on his front paws. He hadn't taken his eyes off Eli since they walked in. Not once. Kyle stood just outside the doorway, arms crossed, his badge clipped to his belt, eyes on the boy. And the dog. Something about the way the animal moved made him pause. It wasn't the alert posture or the obvious loyalty. It was the precision. Controlled. Like training hadn't been forgotten. He stepped inside, careful not to startle either of them. "Eli," Kyle said gently, "I brought you something." He held out a peanut butter sandwich from the vending machine and a small carton of chocolate milk. Eli hesitated, then reached for it with both hands. The dog didn't move, but Kyle noticed his ears shift slightly when Eli did. A subtle, protective response. Kyle sat down across the room, close enough to talk, but far enough not to crowd them. "Mind if I ask you something about your bear?" Eli looked down at the toy. "What about it?" "Your dad gave it to you before he died, right?" The boy nodded. "Did he say anything else? Like, why it was important?" Eli furrowed his brow, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. He said, not to lose it, that there was something inside that might help, if things ever got bad. Kyle sat forward. Inside? Eli hugged the bear tighter. He didn't say what. That was enough for Kyle. He stood, walked over carefully, and knelt beside the cot. Can I take a look? I'll be careful. Eli hesitated. Then, after a beat, he slowly extended the bear to Kyle. The dog's head lifted slightly. Kyle noticed. He accepted the bear with both hands, feeling the weight of it. It was soft, worn down from years of clinging. One ear was hanging by a thread, and the stitching along the side looked newer than the rest. Kyle ran his fingers over the seams. Then he felt it. Not stuffing. Something firm. He looked at Eli. I think there's something in here. The boy nodded once, eyes wide. Kyle pulled a pocket knife from his belt, unfolded the smallest blade, and carefully slipped it through the seam. The fabric gave with a soft tear. Inside was plastic, something wrapped, pressed against the stuffing. He pulled it out slowly. It was a small silver key, thin, flat, with an embossed number on the head, 118, and a name, Briar Bank, Private Client Division. Kyle exhaled slowly. That was no random trinket. Briar was discreet, expensive, the kind of place used by people who had secrets and money worth protecting. He turned the key in his hand. Did your dad ever go to the bank with you? No, Eli said softly. He used to go alone. He'd come back really tired sometimes. Said people at work were pretending to be his friend, but weren't. Kyle looked at him. Did he mention anyone in particular? Eli nodded. Claire. The dog stood up. No growl, just movement, swift and sure, closing the gap between Eli and Kyle. He didn't bare his teeth or bark. He just placed his body firmly between them, not in aggression, but as a signal, a reminder. Kyle froze. Hey, he said quietly. I'm not hurting him. The shepherd didn't move, but his eyes watched Kyle with a weight that felt almost human. Kyle raised his hands. All right, I get it. You're looking out for him. The dog's gaze didn't soften, but after a few seconds, he stepped back and resumed his place near the cot. Kyle stared for a long moment. You're not just some stray, are you? The shepherd blinked, then looked away. Kyle returned to the desk and carefully placed the key inside an evidence pouch. His thoughts were spinning. This wasn't just a case of abuse anymore. It was a message, a breadcrumb trail, one that Richard Jameson had left behind, anticipating the worst. And now, the only reason it had been found was a dog that refused to leave a freezing child on a porch. He turned to the dog again. Where did you come from? No response, of course, but Kyle had the sense he was being measured, tested, not as a threat, but as a participant, someone the dog hadn't fully decided on yet. The door opened behind him. Sergeant Dana Lopez stepped in, short and sharp-eyed, her winter coat still dusted with snow. Heard you brought in the Jameson kid, she said. Word is, stepmom's already on the phone with a lawyer. Kyle tossed her the pouch with the key. She's gonna need more than a lawyer. Dana caught it. Read the label. Well, that's not the kind of thing you hide in a teddy bear unless you're expecting trouble. Exactly. She looked toward Eli, then at the dog. What's his name? No tags, Kyle said, but he listens like he's been through training. Military. Maybe. Dana whistled under her breath. Guess someone up there's watching that boy. Kyle didn't answer. He was watching the dog again. Not just watching, learning. Because instincts like that didn't come from nowhere. And sometimes the only reason a case cracked open was because someone, or something, refused to walk away. Later that night, Kyle stood by the cot, watching as Eli drifted into sleep. The bear was tucked under one arm, the shepherd curled at the boy's side like a sentinel. Kyle whispered under his breath, "Thanks for not giving up on him." The dog didn't move, but Kyle could have sworn he saw the tail twitch, once soft and sure, the kind of gesture that said, "I'm not done yet." The winter sun was little more than a pale smear behind the clouds when Kyle steered the unmarked sedan into the private parking lot of Briar Bank. Snow dripped from the awning over the entrance, melting into long icicles. The building itself was all sharp lines and mirrored glass, the kind of place built to keep people out, not invite them in. Security cameras followed every movement, but the lot was almost empty at mid-morning. In the back seat, Eli sat bundled in a precinct-issued coat, his teddy bear clutched to his chest. His eyes darted to the bank, then down to the German shepherd beside him. The dog, whom Kyle had started calling Shadow, sat alert and still, his nose testing the air each time someone walked past the car. The boy's hand rested on the thick fur at his neck, as though it were the only thing keeping him steady. Karen Ellis from Child Services waited near the steps, her auburn hair tucked into a wool cap. She had agreed to come as an observer, but kept glancing at the dog with a kind of disbelief, as if she couldn't decide whether to call animal control or shake his paw. Kyle gave her a small nod and led the group inside. The bank's interior smelled of polished marble and cold air. Security guards in navy suits stood by the elevators, their hands clasped loosely in front of them, but their eyes moved like predators. They noticed the boy, the dog, and Kyle's badge in one glance. Martin Duffy, the branch manager, appeared from behind a frosted glass door, smoothing his tie. He was in his late 50s, his hair thinning, but his handshake still firm. He didn't bother to hide his curiosity. "You have the client key?" he asked. Kyle held it up. "Box 118, registered to Richard Jameson." Martin's polite expression flickered for just a second at the name, then snapped back. "Follow me, please." They descended a narrow staircase to the vault level. The fluorescent lighting hummed overhead, reflecting off steel boxes that stretched the length of the room. The air was cooler down here, heavy with the smell of metal and time. Martin unlocked the master lock with a practiced flick of his wrist, then gestured for Kyle to use the small silver key. Kyle crouched beside Eli. "This belonged to your dad," he said quietly. "Do you want to open it?" Eli looked at the box, then at Shadow. The dog's ears tilted forward, his tail still. The boy stepped closer and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. Inside was a long, flat deposit box. Martin placed it on the narrow table and stepped back. "Take your time," he murmured. Kyle opened the lid slowly. On top lay a leather-bound notebook. Beneath it, a flash drive sealed in a plastic sleeve. Under that, a stack of manila envelopes tied with string. All neatly arranged, all deliberate. Kyle picked up the notebook first. The leather was worn, the edges darkened from years of use. He flipped it open. Inside was Richard Jameson's handwriting, strong, slanted, urgent. The first pages held ordinary notes about meetings, business contacts, but as Kyle turned the pages, the tone shifted. Words grew jagged, sentences cut off. Names appeared. Claire, Robert, false signatures, offshore transfers. Then a single line that stopped him cold. "If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident." Kyle read it twice, his pulse loud in his ears. He handed the flash drive to Karen without a word. She turned it over in her hands, her eyes scanning the sleeve. "There's a date on it," she whispered. 2 days before his death." The envelopes contained photocopies of financial records, insurance policies, and at the bottom, an unsigned letter addressed simply to "My son." Kyle unfolded it. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. "Eli, I tried to protect you. If you are reading this, it means they have succeeded in silencing me. There is proof here. Show it to someone you trust. Do not let them tell you this was my fault. Dad Kyle swallowed hard. He handed the letter to Karen and glanced at Eli. The boy stood still, staring at the table, his small hands white around the bear. Shadow nudged him gently with his nose, a low whine slipping from his throat. Eli blinked, then looked at Kyle. He knew, didn't he? Kyle crouched down until his eyes were level with the boy's. Yeah, he said quietly. He knew, and he left this so the truth wouldn't die with him. A sound broke the silence, a faint metallic scrape at the far end of the vault. Shadow's head snapped up, ears pricked. He stepped in front of Eli, body rigid, his eyes fixed on the stairwell. Kyle caught it instantly. He set the notebook down and straightened. Someone else is here. Martin frowned. That's impossible. This level is restricted. The dog growled low, a sound that rolled through the metal room. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell, then stopped. Kyle pulled his badge from his coat and moved toward the sound, his other hand brushing the grip of his service weapon. Bank security, Martin whispered, but there was doubt in his voice. The footsteps retreated. A door closed. Silence returned, except for Shadow's steady growl. Kyle waited another beat, then relaxed slightly, though his pulse still hammered. He glanced back at Eli. Stay with Karen. But Eli was already holding Shadow's fur, eyes wide but steady. The boy didn't say a word, but the dog's posture said enough. Whoever had been down there wasn't supposed to be. Kyle sealed the notebook, flash drive, and letters in evidence bags, his mind racing. It wasn't just that Richard Jameson suspected foul play. He had documented it. The key had unlocked far more than a box. It had opened a door onto motive, method, and names. He zipped the bags shut and looked at the dog. You were right, he said under his breath. Shadow's tail flicked once. Upstairs, the marble lobby seemed brighter, but Kyle's nerves stayed tight. Through the glass doors, he caught sight of a man in a dark overcoat, standing by the curb, pretending to look at his phone. His posture was too still, his glance too sharp. When Kyle's eyes met his, the man smiled faintly and turned towards the street. Kyle put a steadying hand on Eli's shoulder. Let's go, he said softly. As they walked out into the pale winter light, Shadow pressed close to the boy's leg, every step a mirror of Kyle's. The weight of the evidence bag felt like lead in Kyle's pocket, but the weight of the dog's presence, silent, sure, felt like something else entirely. For the first time since Richard Jameson's death, the truth had a chance to breathe, and it had arrived on 4 paws. The snow had turned slick and glassy by the time Kyle pulled the unmarked sedan onto the main road. Downtown Portland shimmered under the sheen of freezing drizzle, every traffic light reflected in slush and ice. The heater blew warm against the windshield, but Kyle's grip on the steering wheel stayed tight. Beside him, Karen Ellis reviewed the flash drive in her lap, still processing what they had found in the safety. Deposit box. In the back seat, Eli leaned against Shadow. The bear clutched under one arm, his face turned towards the window, though he wasn't really looking. The German shepherd lay close, every breath slow and measured. But his eyes didn't rest. Shadow watched the world as it passed, ears twitching at each sound, nose testing the air that seeped through the cracks in the doors. At the intersection near Union Station, the light turned red. Kyle slowed the car, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. A black SUV had pulled in behind them. Tinted windows, no plates visible. He blinked once. The same vehicle had been idling near the bank entrance just 10 minutes ago. He'd chalked it up to coincidence. Now it had followed through 3 turns. Shadow's head lifted. He didn't bark, didn't whine. But a deep growl vibrated from his chest, soft and low like the slow crank of an old machine. Kyle stiffened. "You see it too, don't you?" The dog didn't move his head, but his eyes shifted toward the back window, steady and sure. His tail didn't wag. Karen looked up. "What's wrong?" Kyle didn't answer immediately. The light turned green, and he eased the sedan forward. "SUV behind us. Been with us since the bank." Karen turned, tried to glance back without being obvious. "Think it's them?" "I think someone wanted to know what Richard kept in that box." He changed lanes slowly, signaled a turn onto 14th. The SUV followed. Eli sat straighter now. "They're coming?" Kyle met his eyes in the mirror. "Not if we don't let them." The tires hissed against the wet road. Slush sprayed from beneath the wheel wells. The SUV closed the distance. Shadow sat up fully now, his head nearly brushing the ceiling of the car, his body coiled and tense. The growl had stopped, but the message remained. Alert. Ready. Kyle tapped the brakes once. The SUV did the same. He swerved left, cutting across 2 lanes and turning hard onto an industrial road that ran parallel to the old rail yards. Trucks lined the sides, steam rising from gutters. No pedestrians, no cameras. The SUV followed. No hesitation. "Hang on," Kyle said. He punched the accelerator, and the sedan surged forward, fishtailing slightly as the tires struggled to grip the frozen asphalt. The engine roared. Karen braced herself against the dash. Eli cried out, sliding against his seatbelt. Shadow moved without panic, placing himself in front of the boy, pressing him gently back, blocking the window with his frame. The SUV was gaining. "Who the hell are these people?" Karen muttered. Kyle's mind raced. The USB, the journal, the letter to Eli. Whatever Richard had uncovered, someone had known. And now, someone wanted to make sure it never left that vault. He spotted an alley up ahead, tight, narrow, lined with dumpsters. No exit on the other side, but cover, enough to regroup. He spun the wheel and ducked into the alley, snow crunching under the tires as the sedan skidded to a hard stop behind a row of crates. He killed the headlights. Everyone in the car froze. The SUV slowed at the alley's mouth. Its headlights swept across the opening, then stopped. Keel's hand moved to the grip of his sidearm. "If they come in—" But the SUV didn't move. It sat there, waiting. Shadow's breathing had slowed. His eyes never blinked. His entire body was still as stone, except for the muscles along his back, which twitched in anticipation. "They're trying to smoke us out," Kyle said quietly. "They know if they chase, we can call it in. But if we get scared and move first, they win. Should we wait?" Karen asked. "No," Kyle said. "We bait them instead." He started the engine again, reversed down the alley until they hit the cross street. Then he floored it. The SUV took the bait. It turned sharply and surged after them, its tires shrieking as they caught the icy pavement. The chase began again, past abandoned warehouses, flickering street lamps, and empty intersections where the snow had gathered in quiet drifts. Shadow remained silent, focused, a soldier. The SUV gained again, this time faster. Kyle took a hard right onto an access ramp toward the I-405 loop, using every bit of instinct he'd built in patrol. He slid between 2 cars, merged, then exited immediately down a ramp into the lower district. He needed cover. People, lights, witnesses. Downtown would give them that. He cut across a narrow bridge, spotted a grocery store ahead, and veered into its back lot, where delivery trucks sat parked in snow. He pulled in behind a dark semi, cut the lights again, and whispered, "Down." Eli ducked. Karen covered him with her coat. Shadow didn't move. He stayed upright, body blocking the child, his ears twitching like antennae. Through the windshield, the SUV rolled by slowly. Headlights panned across the lot. They didn't stop. The vehicle passed, then disappeared into the night. Silence returned. Breathing eased. Kyle sat back, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Eli whispered, "They were going to hurt us, weren't they?" Kyle didn't answer right away. Then he looked at the mirror. "They were going to silence your dad, and they still think they can finish the job." Shadow let out a single quiet huff. Karen turned to Kyle. "We need to go to someone higher. Federal. This isn't just family drama anymore." Kyle nodded slowly. "And we'll do that," he said, eyes on Shadow, "but only because someone wouldn't let us walk away." The dog turned to him, as if hearing his name without it being spoken. In that frozen silence, Kyle knew. The case hadn't started at the bank. It started the moment a dog stood between a boy and the cold, and refused to move. The snow had started again by the time Kyle pulled into the small diner lot off Powell Boulevard. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt, the pie was always out of season, and the waitresses knew when to talk and when to let you sit with your silence. The neon sign out front flickered faintly. 24 hours, casting a tired red glow across the frozen asphalt. Kyle cut the engine but didn't move. In the back seat, Eli slept, curled beneath his oversized coat, his cheek pressed to Shadow's thick fur. The German shepherd rested, but didn't sleep. His ears twitched at every gust of wind, every far-off car door. Always listening. Inside the diner, at a booth in the far corner, sat a woman in scrubs and a fleece-lined coat. She was in her late 40s, with hair pulled back in a frayed clip and eyes that looked like they hadn't closed properly in days. Her name was Dana Rourke. She didn't touch her coffee. Kyle left the engine running and cracked the window before stepping out. He glanced at Shadow, who met his eyes and then turned his head toward the diner, ears pricking. "Yeah," Kyle thought, "you feel it too." He slid into the booth across from Dana, her hands folded tightly around a foam cup. "You're late," she said, but without venom. "You're the one who texted out of nowhere, said you had information. Said not to bring backup." She gave a short nod. "I was scared I wouldn't follow through if I saw a badge." Kyle studied her. "You worked hospice for Richard Jameson." Dana nodded, then lowered her voice. "He was already on a decline. Not fast, but steady. I was his night nurse the last 2 weeks." "Why didn't you come forward when he died?" Her mouth twisted. "Because I'd seen enough death to know when something felt off. But I also knew no one was going to believe the overworked nurse who'd once lost her license for a charting error." Kyle leaned in. "Say it plain." She met his gaze. "He didn't die of natural causes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a small, scratched-up digital voice recorder. She placed it on the table between them, like it was a live wire. "He asked me to keep it recording during the nights. Said he didn't trust anyone around him anymore. Not his doctor, not his wife, not even the cleaning staff." Kyle's fingers hovered over the device. "What's on it?" Dana's voice dropped to a whisper. "The night before he died, he was groggy but still coherent. He said, 'Don't let her take Eli. She's not what she pretends to be.' Then he started coughing so hard I had to sit him up. His lips were turning blue. I was calling the on-call physician when Claire came in with a bottle of wine and smiled like everything was fine." "You didn't report it?" Dana's hands tightened on the cup. "No, I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But Claire looked at me that night like she already owned my silence. Then, the next morning, Richard was dead." Kyle tapped the recorder gently with his index finger. "And you held on to this all this time?" "I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing him say it, so I transferred the files onto a backup. I kept the original just in case. But I didn't know what to do until I saw your name in the news, asking for leads in the Jameson case." Kyle reached into his coat, pulled out a small evidence pouch, and slid the recorder inside. "You just made the case a homicide." Dana looked away, her eyes glassy. "I should have come sooner. But you came now." Shadow's growl made them both turn. He was on his feet inside the car, body tense, gaze locked across the street. Kyle followed his eyes. A dark sedan had pulled into the far side of the parking lot. Engine idling. No one stepped out. Kyle stood quickly and moved back to the car. "Time to go," he said, opening the back door. Eli stirred, blinking. "What's wrong?" Shadow didn't wait. He jumped into the front seat, placing his body sideways across the dash like a barricade. He didn't bark, but his message was clear. "Eyes front. Move now." Kyle didn't argue. He climbed into the driver's seat and pulled out fast, tires crunching against snow and ice. The dark sedan made no move at first. Then it pulled out, slowly, following at a distance. Dana watched them leave from the diner window, her shoulders hunched. She reached into her coat again and pulled out a second flash drive. She'd made 2 copies. One stayed with her, just in case. Back in the car, Kyle merged into traffic and took a sharp right down a side street. The sedan behind them didn't follow. A decoy, maybe. A warning. Or just someone watching who wanted them to know they were being watched. Shadow stayed alert the whole ride back to the precinct, his body like a coiled spring, always between the child and the threat. As they pulled into the underground garage, Kyle finally let out the breath he'd been holding. He looked in the mirror at Eli, who was still awake, his face pale but steady. "Eli," Kyle said softly, "your dad tried to protect you. And now, with that tape, we can protect his name too." Eli didn't say anything. He just reached out and touched Shadow's shoulder. The dog leaned into it, just slightly. And in that small movement, Kyle saw it clearly. They weren't just gathering evidence anymore. They were carrying out a promise. The precinct's briefing room smelled of coffee that had burned on the hot plate too long and wet wool drying by the radiator. Outside, snow tapped against the windows in slow, steady bursts. Inside, Kyle stood by the whiteboard, staring at the names he'd written across it in black marker. Claire Jameson, Robert Keane, the shell companies linked to Richard's fortune. Lines and arrows connected them like a spider's web. Eli sat quietly at a corner table with Shadow at his feet, flipping through a book Karen had brought him. The boy traced the pictures without seeing them. The German shepherd lay coiled beside him, his amber eyes scanning the room like a sentry posted on foreign ground. Across the table, Detective Frank Doyle leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. He was a heavy-set man with sandy hair and a thick mustache that framed a smile Kyle had once trusted. Frank had been his partner years ago on night patrol before a suspension over a domestic case had pushed him to the margins. But Kyle had believed he'd come back cleaner. "You're chasing ghosts," Frank said. "Rich guy dies, wife gets the money, kid's scared. That doesn't make it murder." Kyle kept his voice level. "You've read the journal, you've heard the recording. That's more than a scared kid's word." Frank shrugged. "Or it's a guy with paranoia and a nurse who wants attention." Shadow lifted his head, his ears angled forward, his gaze fixed on Frank. He didn't move, but his breathing changed, slower, deeper. Kyle noticed. Karen looked from Frank to Kyle. "You said the bank SUV followed you. Someone knew about the deposit box." Kyle nodded, which means someone inside knew where we were going before we left. Frank raised his brows. "And you're looking at me? Come on, Kyle. After all the nights we've covered each other?" Shadow stood. The movement was sudden but silent, like a shadow taking shape. He stepped forward until he was between Frank and Eli. His tail dropped low, his body aligned like an arrow. No growl, no bark, just a steady, unflinching stare at Frank Doyle. The room went still. Kyle's pulse jumped. He knew Shadow's language now. This wasn't a reaction to anger or noise. This was recognition. "Easy," Kyle said softly, but his eyes were on Frank. Frank shifted in his chair. "What's his problem?" Shadow's lips parted just enough to show teeth. Then came a single bark, sharp and deep, like a shot cracking the silence. Eli flinched. Karen's hand tightened on his shoulder. Kyle took a slow step closer to Frank. "Where were you this morning?" Frank blinked. "At home." "You didn't come in until noon. That's 2 hours after the bank visit. And somehow Claire's lawyer knew about the flash drive before we even logged it." Frank's eyes darted just once towards the door. Shadow growled, low and certain. Kyle's voice hardened. "I don't want to believe this. But if you're selling out a child to the same people who killed his father, you're not walking out of here." Frank's jaw clenched. "You've lost your mind." Kyle reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. "Then you won't mind me checking the GPS on your city car." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Frank's hand twitched toward his jacket pocket. Shadow lunged forward, not to bite, but to block. He slammed his body against Frank's knee, knocking him off balance and sending the phone clattering from his hand before he could press whatever button he'd been reaching for. Kyle moved fast, twisting Frank's arm behind his back, pinning him to the table. The room filled with the sound of labored breathing and the faint crackle of the heater. Karen ushered Eli back, but the boy didn't cry. He just stared at Frank with a strange, quiet certainty, his hand still on Shadow's back. Frank muttered, "You don't understand. They would have killed me. They still will." Kyle's voice was ice. "You should have come to me, not them." Frank sagged under the weight of his own words. "They paid me to tell them where you were going, just to keep track. Nothing else. But after the bank, they said they wanted the kid." Kyle tightened his grip. "You're under arrest." Shadow stood at Kyle's side, still and watchful, his head high. Frank didn't look at the dog. He couldn't. Minutes later, uniformed officers led Frank out, his wrists cuffed, his eyes down. The briefing room emptied, leaving only Kyle, Karen, Eli, and Shadow. The boy's breathing was shaky. Kyle crouched in front of him. "It's over. He won't hurt you." Eli glanced at Shadow. He knew. Kyle followed his gaze to the shepherd. "Yeah, he did." Shadow settled back on his haunches, exhaling once like a soldier standing down after a fight. His eyes met Kyle's for a long moment. No words. But the meaning was clear. The case had just turned. Not because of warrants, not because of guns. Because a dog had chosen to speak once, and Kyle had listened. The courthouse loomed grey and silent under a sky thick with snow, the columns at its entrance dusted in white. Inside, the air felt pressed and tense, the kind of stillness that precedes thunder. Reporters in heavy coats clustered near the marble steps, their breath rising in clouds as their cameras flashed over anyone with a badge or a briefcase. But no one looked twice at the child holding a teddy bear or the German shepherd walking silently at his side. Eli Jameson wore a small wool coat that swallowed his frame, his hand gripped tightly in Kyle's. On the other side, Shadow walked close, tail low, head high, his presence part guardian, part anchor. They moved together as one, cop, child, and canine, into a building that had been waiting to hear the truth. Inside the courtroom, the lights seemed too bright, the polished wood too clean. A quiet murmur passed between the rows of benches as spectators noticed the boy. Karen Ellis walked just behind them, her clipboard against her chest like a shield. Judge Harland, a man with a stone face and wire-rimmed glasses, sat at the bench, flipping through his notes with careful hands. His gaze moved to the child, then to the dog, and he raised an eyebrow. Is the animal testifying too, Officer Munro? He asked, voice dry. No, Your Honor, Kyle said, voice steady. But I'd ask the court to allow him to stay. The child won't speak without him. There was a pause. Judge Harland looked again at the shepherd, who stared right back. Not aggressive, not nervous, just present. Harland gave a slight nod. Very well. But one bark and he's out. Shadow blinked. That was all. District Attorney Lenora Vance stood slowly. She was mid-50s, sharp-eyed, silver hair pulled into a bun that had survived 3 decades of cross-examinations. Her tone was measured, but her gaze never wavered. The state calls Eli Jameson. There was a rustle in the courtroom as the boy stood, still gripping the bear. Shadow rose too, walking with him to the witness box. He sat at its base, tail curled beside him, never looking away. The clerk held out a Bible. Eli touched it with small fingers. Do you swear to tell the truth? Yes, he whispered. He climbed into the seat, legs too short to reach the floor. The bear stayed in his lap. He looked small beneath the overhead light, the courtroom rising around him like a canyon. Vance moved carefully, voice soft. Eli, do you know why you're here? Yes. Can you tell the court what happened the night your father died? The boy's voice quivered. He was sick. He said he didn't feel right. But he was mad, too. He kept saying, she did it. Who is she? Eli looked across the room to the defense table. Claire Jameson sat stiffly, her dark blazer sharp at the shoulders, her hair pinned so tightly it gleamed. Her lawyer, Robert Geller, leaned toward her, whispering behind his hand. Eli's voice dropped. My stepmom. Vance stepped aside. Did he say what she did? Eli nodded. He said, don't let her take me. Said she's not what she pretends. There was a murmur in the gallery. Judge Harland gave a sharp tap of his gavel. Silence. Kyle sat on the edge of his seat. Shadow didn't move. Vance continued. Did your father say this to anyone else? No, just me, and the nurse, Miss Dana. Did you tell anyone? I tried, Eli said, gripping the bear tighter. But she told me if I said anything, she'd send me away. Vance nodded, then looked to the clerk. Permission to play Exhibit 12C? The judge motioned. Proceed. A speaker was wheeled out. A faint hiss of static filled the room. Then Richard Jameson's voice crackled to life, raspy, strained, but unmistakably real. She's not who she says. Don't let her take him. If you're hearing this, protect my boy. The courtroom held its breath. Then came a knock on the door in the recording. A pause. A woman's voice, light, too sweet. You still awake, darling? The audio cut. Gasps fluttered like wind through dry leaves. Claire's face drained to a sickly white. Her attorney stood, objecting, but Judge Harland raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Geller. Vance turned back to the witness stand. Eli, was that your father's voice? He nodded. Did he sound afraid? The boy didn't speak. He didn't have to. He just looked down at the bear, then across the room. And then Shadow stood. No bark, no growl. He simply stood, his eyes locked on Claire. And for a moment, even the judge leaned. Forward. The courtroom froze, because everyone in that room, jury, bailiff, even the reporters in the back, felt the same thing. That dog saw something. Claire shifted uncomfortably, looked away, crossed her arms. Shadow sat again. Quiet, watching. No one spoke for several long seconds. Then Vance turned back to the judge. No further questions. Geller rose, adjusting his jacket. His voice was falsely gentle. Eli, sweetheart, you're 5, right? 6, Eli corrected softly. Right, 6. And you're very brave to be here. But sometimes when people are sad, they get confused. Isn't that right? Eli didn't answer. You had just lost your father. Maybe you misunderstood something? Eli looked at Shadow. The shepherd didn't move. Then Eli said, voice clear now. I didn't misunderstand. I remember. Geller frowned. You're sure? Yes. The silence after that answer was louder than any testimony. Geller gave up. Nothing further, Your Honor. Judge Harland leaned forward, his tone thoughtful. The witness may step down. Eli slid off the chair. He didn't return to his seat. Instead, he walked straight to Shadow and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. The shepherd allowed it, pressing gently into the hug like it was routine. As they walked back to the bench, the entire courtroom watched in silence. And Kyle knew. That moment, the boy, the dog, and the truth echoing from a speaker had done what no badge or report ever could. It had cut through doubt, and it had started with one dog who wouldn't let a child stand alone. The gavel fell like thunder. Life in prison. The courtroom buzzed with restrained reactions, but Kyle sat still, his hands folded, heart beating slow and heavy. Across the room, Denise Calloway's face collapsed into something between shock and disbelief. Her lawyer placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, but she didn't feel it. The moment the verdict was read, Eli leaned his shoulder gently against Kyle's. The boy didn't cry, he didn't cheer, he just closed his eyes. And next to them, Shadow sat straight-backed, calm, watchful, his gaze unmoving from the woman who had nearly destroyed a child's life. The press didn't take long. As soon as the judge dismissed the courtroom, cameras swarmed. Questions were hurled toward Kyle and the DA, microphones angled for sound bites. But the real moment came not from a man, or a judge, or a headline. It came when the court bailiff stepped aside and a representative from the Canine Medal of Valor Committee approached Kyle and knelt beside Shadow. For service beyond instinct, for judgment beyond training, for loyalty beyond comprehension. The silver medallion was slipped over Shadow's neck, not like a leash or collar, but like a medal of war. The room quieted. Even the reporters paused their questions, as if the weight of what the dog had done finally took shape. It hadn't been a manhunt or an act of defense. It had been discernment. Shadow had sensed the rot when no one else did, had stood in the doorway of a boy's bedroom when a detective looked the other way, had led Kyle not with growls but with stillness. Sometimes silence was the loudest warning of all. When they walked out of the courthouse, Kyle noticed the boy's hand slip into his. Eli didn't speak until they reached the parking lot, where the wind carried the scent of warm asphalt and distant magnolia. Am I going back to the center now? Eli asked, eyes lowered. Kyle crouched to Shadow's level. The dog's tail tapped once against the concrete. His eyes met Kyle's, not for instruction, but with something that felt suspiciously like approval. Kyle looked back up at Eli. No, he said. You're coming home. Eli blinked. His eyes searched Kyle's face like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. For how long? The boy asked. As long as Shadow says it's okay. That made Eli smile. Just a flicker at first, then wider, the first real smile Kyle had seen in weeks. Shadow gave a short, satisfied huff, then moved ahead toward the car as if he already knew where they were going. That night, Kyle stayed up late, filling out the initial paperwork for adoption. There would be more hoops, more bureaucracy, but for the first time, he didn't dread it. For the first time in years, the silence of his house didn't feel like an echo chamber. It felt like a space waiting to be filled. Shadow curled up in the hallway between their two bedrooms, alert but relaxed. Not guarding, just listening. Kyle glanced down at the form again, pen hovering. Emergency contact. He paused, then smiled. Shadow Morales. He wrote half-jokingly. but something in his chest settled when he wrote it. Maybe justice didn't always wear a badge. Maybe it came with a black coat, amber eyes, and the kind of heart that never needed words to protect a child. And that, Kyle thought, was more than any courtroom could offer. The house sat quietly at the edge of the forest, where pine met sky and silence wasn't empty. It was earned. A year had passed. Eli's shoes, once too tight and second-hand, now lay kicked off near the porch swing, muddy from the soccer field. His laugh came easy these days, rising through the screen door along with the scent of grilled cheese and wood smoke. Inside, Kyle stirred a pot of soup, the one Eli always requested on chilly nights. The boy didn't speak of the past much anymore, but sometimes he'd reach down and touch Shadow's ear when no one was watching, like a grounding wire to something ancient and steady. Shadow lay sprawled on the porch, front paws over the step, eyes closed but ears twitching. He wasn't waiting for danger. He was just present. Not a detective, not a tool, just family. The first snowfall came earlier than usual that year. Light flakes spun down through the pines, dusting the edge of the deck. Eli padded out barefoot, only to be herded back in by Shadow's gentle nudge. The boy laughed, flung a snowball at the dog's side, and missed, intentionally. Shadow huffed, rose, and trotted back to his post by the door. Kyle watched from the kitchen window. A scene like that used to seem impossible. A boy who'd flinched at touch, a man who'd forgotten how to believe in home, and a dog that had once only known duty. Somehow they'd made it work, not by trying to fix each other, but by refusing to leave. That winter, a local paper ran a piece titled "Hero Dog, Healing Boy, and the Detective Who Stayed." The journalist, fresh out of college, had expected a dramatic quote for her wrap-up, something about justice, courage, or maybe forgiveness. But what she got was quieter. She sat across from Kyle at the kitchen table, her recorder between them, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Why do you think the dog chose to stay?" she asked. Kyle looked toward the porch, where Shadow now sat, watching the horizon, as if the past was a sound he could still hear. He didn't answer right away, just took a breath, the kind you take when the air feels like memory. "Because he knew the truth before we did," Kyle finally said. He always did. The reporter paused, then turned to glance at Shadow. The dog didn't move, but his eyes flicked toward her, then back to the tree line. Later that evening, after the article ran online, strangers began writing in. Some had lost their own dogs. Others had stories about rescues, about loyalty that couldn't be explained. A few just wrote, "Thank you. I needed this today." Kyle didn't reply to most, but he read them, every single one. And every night before locking the door, he would glance down at Shadow, now curled at the base of the stairs, snoring lightly. "What do you think?" Kyle would whisper. "Did we get it right?" Shadow never answered. He didn't need to, because some truths don't come in words. They come in presence, in staying when others leave, in listening when others doubt, in choosing love not because it's easy, but because someone has to. That's what remained. Not the badge, not the case, not even the scars. Just the boy, the man, and the dog who stayed when it mattered most. So now, we ask you, if you've ever been saved by loyalty, by instinct, by something four-legged that refused to give up on you. What's your story with a loyal pet? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to German Shepherd Stories for more true tales of courage, connection, and the dogs who change everything.